The stillness of the forest trail was so primeval that the tread of a soft-booted foot was a startling disturbance.
Oh, man.
Hey, you staging dogs. In this, the final part of a conversation with Conan's compatriots Steve Saffel and Brian D. Anderson, we hear more about Steve's freelance work as an editor and the Heroic Legends series from Titan Books. Steve and Brian also share stories about writers Mercedes Lackey, Anne McCaffrey, Terry Brooks, Tony Isabella, and a particularly special anecdote about Dave Gemmell and Stan Lee. I hope you enjoy part 6 of a conversation with Conan's compatriots Steve Saffel and Brian D. Anderson. The stillness of the forest trail was so primeval that the tread of a soft-booted foot was a startling disturbance.
Oh, man.
But you see, that was one of the great things about Howard, and that's the source of what I would like to see, which is taking you into the place instantly.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see that compounded, because I think that Howard created a world that was a microcosm of all of our globe. And I think that the places that Conan could be taken could just be astonishing.
Yeah. I think you'll also see, if they allow it to happen, a crop of Conan writers coming out of the indie world that will probably surprise you. Because what I noticed about Howard's stories is he grabs you by the short and curlies right away. I mean, there's not this big lag time of build up to the first thing that happens. That first line was poignant. You're dropped into this world. Boom, there you are.
Yeah.
You know, and in the indie world, that is kind of a rule of thumb that you start out with a bang. You don't start out with this slow burn going up, what lead time. It starts out with a bang. And I think that you're going to see out of the indie world, if they start tackling the Conan world, Conan characters, you're going to see some really good stories coming out of writers you've never heard of, unless you're in the indie material.
Right.
Because that's kind of like, that's their shtick, man. That's what they do. And you're gonna have these Robert E. Howard fans. They're gonna read this shit and go, wow, this is that doesn't read like Howard, doesn't read as poetically, but damn, they're just doing damn, this is just like the Conan I remember as a kid,
Well, I hope so. By the way, before I forget it, if any of your viewers have never seen another movie, there's a movie they really ought to watch, which is The Whole Wide World. Because have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it. I'm trying to.
Oh my goodness, you've never seen it. The Whole Wide World features very young Vincent D'Onofrio and Renee Zellweger.
Oh yes, I have seen it.
Yes.
The Howard movie.
Because D'Onofrio plays Howard, it's a phenomenal movie.
Is it? Yeah, I meant to watch that. I don't know, something happened. I think I had to write the Conan story and it got distracted.
It's actually pretty freely available. It's on some of the free services out there.
Something
like that.
Oh, wow.
I highly recommend watching that.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
hey, I'm gonna have what you got going on? Who you got mentoring nowadays, Steve?
Well, I'm working on 2 or 3 different projects that I can't really talk about at the moment. But my goal at the moment is to work with writers to bring forth their best prose, their best characters, but also to work with writers on things like pacing, on clarity, on narrative flow, and on concept. And so I'm working with a couple of guys on very unusual concepts. One of them is a dark fantasy horror concept, and one of them is a science fiction concept. But I got to the point that the best part of my job was working with writers. Yeah, and so I decided it was time to completely focus on working with writers on their work and on their careers, because I had a couple of guys who's were sort of feeling stuck, and I can help them get unstuck.
That feeling. Yes, it's tough. I mean, I came out of the indie world originally, and I made the transition over into traditional publishing. And I remember one of the shocks to the system was working with real editors like yourself. And I had to really swallow my pride and realize I don't know everything. And this person didn't reach their position with this publisher by accident. They know what the hell they're talking about. And I need to, you know, uh, you know, it's not that a lot of people don't understand the editing process. That I mean, they think it's I don't know what people actually think it is, but it is a lot of conversations as well. I mean, if I give something to Steve gives me back. Now, if I, 9 times out of 10, I'll probably defer to his greater wisdom. But there may be instances where no, I don't agree with you there, and we're gonna have a talk. And I mean, I don't agree with that. And I'm going to present my case.
But that helps flesh it out. Yeah.
Ultimately, one of the nice things about working with a writer on their own original concept is that it is your concept. So I will make all the recommendations in the world, but ultimately it has to be the story that you want to tell. Having said that, I do think that there are ways to make something so appealing that I can act as both the objective audience and I can help with the techniques in really striking a chord with that audience. And so, my goal is always going to be in helping that writer realize their vision and get it to the most readers they possibly can.
So, how many of the before you retired, how many of the Conan stories had you had a chance to read?
Well, I did all of the short stories.
All the short, you got it. Okay.
And then in terms of novels, we had only had the chance to do the one novel for with Steve Sterling and the John Hawking. So I hadn't.
Now, is the John Hawking, was that something he had already written?
It was. It had things that would, I think, help it. That because John did that a long time ago. And we sort of had to bring him back up
to do a show with him. I was supposed to do a show with him and Scott Oden, and I ended up something happened. I couldn't be there, but I did watch the show. Yeah, John did a bunch. He did a bunch of the Conan back in the day too, back in the early days. I mean, well, not early, when you say early days of Conan, but what was it? He did like late 90s Conan novels, right?
Well, his was one of the last novels that Tor brought out. And Tor happened for a very interesting reason. Tor used to be run by a guy named Tom Doherty. And Tom came out of the
Tom retired. Tom retired during my tenure there.
Yeah, Tom is a really nice guy, and Tom knew the mass market world in particular before the mass market world more or less disappeared. These days, the biggest problem with mass market is where you can put that format, because the number of places that will actually carry that format these days are vastly less than they used to be.
But you used to go to every gas station, had a little kiosk thing with the rotating thing you could pick up with mass market paperbacks. Now, one thing I've noticed is audiobooks are becoming a thing. I was really hoping Titan was going to put all these shorts on audio, and I still think they should, because to do it would be ignoring a huge market for matter of fact, when I reread the Howard after y'all said y'all wanted me to pitch y'all the ideas, I did. I reread the Howard stuff via audiobook, because I was doing some conventions and I was riding my motorcycle to like 4,500 miles worth of conventions. So I just put the ear things in and hit the highway and listen to the audiobook. It was the narrators are brilliant. I really hope Titan sees the wisdom of putting these into audio form. I mean, because
for the moment, the goal is to do the sequential periodical approach, and that's something that I think has been lacking for a lot of years. And so by releasing them one a month, and each one at the end of each one letting people know that the next one is going to be coming the next month, I hope to create a momentum there that brings people to the written word month after month after month.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed that model, and I'm not a big e-reader, but knowing that it's a comfortable page length, the stories, it's got me reading on a Kindle app, and I'm comfortable with that. For the price, you can't go wrong, and I think it's like
Yeah,
$1.99.
$1.99.
And I know I've got a night or two, just as the kids go to bed, something fun to read. I really appreciated it. It's a great model. So
Well,
hopefully
I'm
it
glad
catches
to
on.
hear that, because that was
Yeah.
the goal from the first day I started thinking about Conan publishing, was that I thought that in addition to trying to do novels that really expanded the Hyborian age in new and exciting ways, I also wanted to do short fiction that brought people in to individual characters. And I'm looking forward to seeing what a lot of folks do. V. Castro is doing a Belit story, and we've got a story coming up of El Borak, and a lot of people in the world just don't even know that anything about El Borak. But James Lovegrove pitched something that's just amazing. So I'm excited by that.
EM just did a great job with that cover.
Oh, good, yeah.
Yeah, I was I actually got in touch with him. I'm gonna send him some printouts and have him sign them. I'm not gonna sell them or anything. I'm just gonna have one for my wall. And because I tell you, when they first put it up for pre-order, I was sitting there. I giggled for like an hour.
Well, cool.
Well, I mean, Conan's my first franchise work. I mean, and if I was when I was talking to the guy who's handling it now, Dequan, who's a super nice young man. I'm sure you introduced me to him. I don't know how much time you spent speaking to him. They were asking me what other properties that might be interested in writing, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't think of anything that I would be anywhere near as excited about. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can think of some stuff from a career standpoint. As far as like having some name recognition.
Yeah,
But I can't think of anything that I got that excited me more than being part of that universe and being a permanent part of that universe. Now, some people will never see anything as canon other than what Howard wrote. But Heroic Signatures owns this property. So when they put something out, it's canon. And not only did I get to write part of who I am into that into canon, I got to make up a new Stygian city. Which,
well, I will say one thing. One thing that I've always felt is that there is no reason that a licensed book has to be any less than an original novel. I think that there are people who approach licensed writing as just piecework, and they're not terribly invested in it. And to my mind, there is no reason that a genre book and a licensed book has to be any less literary than any other work of fiction.
Oh, I agree. I mean, but there's certain things I would never tackle. I would never tackle anything in Tolkien's world. It's
Tolkien's world is a tough one, though, because having come to it from Tolkien, you still got to recognize that fantasy is now decades beyond what Tolkien was doing. And there's been a lot. I mean, I would be more inclined to compare to someone like George Martin or Patrick Rothfuss than to Tolkien, because I think that there are people who learned from Tolkien and then went to just covered new horizons.
Funny you bring up two writers who have never finished their series.
True. Although now I'll tell you, somebody you ought to check out is David Gemmell.
Well, I don't think Martin will ever finish Game of Thrones. I don't think he will. Not in his life. I think, and I don't. I think I mean, I don't know that if I were him that I would either. There's no version of what a book he writes that's gonna live up to expectations, especially now after the abysmal showing of the final season, how people feel about that, and why he's got more money than God. So I mean, he's getting older. Why not just let it go and pull a Robert Jordan? Let somebody else finish it after he's gone.
George is a good guy. George is a nice guy. George is committed to so many different things, and I think, I mean, it really comes down to whatever George does with it is his right and his business. And I would take that. The thing about the television show is that was somebody other than George doing their shtick. I hope George nails the landing, and I hope he does it in a way that satisfies him. But one great thing about being George is that he can do it the way he does it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was a George Martin fan before, but what made me a true George Martin fan was he did an interview one time, and you had somebody get up and start criticizing him for making all the slaves have be people of color. And he goes, well, we filmed that in Morocco. And when you put an open casting call in Morocco, you know who shows up? Moroccans.
Yeah. But again, having said that, that's somebody else's vision.
When we were in Scotland, there's a lot of pasty Dothraki.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I probably had best head out. We've been doing this for a couple of hours. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to listen to the stories and to document them. Now we can share them with other people, and it's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Well, thank you. Brian. Thank you for inviting me. And I started to say something that I do want to do before I'm done, and that is that if somebody loves Howard, they should read David Gemmell. David passed away a few years ago, but I worked with David for a bunch of years, and he was a delight to work with, and he's also was a consummate storyteller.
Oh yeah, brilliant prose. I love the way he writes too. Yeah, Gemmell and Tad Williams are a couple of my favorites.
Yeah. His most famous was the book Legend, and I think my favorite of his was Ravenheart.
Okay, yeah, Gemmell, yeah, can't go wrong. There's so many of them out there that are just. I mean, that's why I'm. When I go to these conventions and I get to meet Larry Niven and I get to meet, I got to meet Mercedes Lackey and I got to meet you and all these legendary writers. People forget. One of my biggest regrets is I never got to meet Anne McCaffrey.
Annie was a sweetheart. She was a sweetheart.
And you get to, and for fans out there, if you like a writer, if you like somebody, and you reach out to an author. We're not like actors. We're you can reach out to us directly through our fan sites and will respond. I mean, I'm talking, you'd be surprised who you'll get a direct response from. Sometimes you'll get the initial response from an assistant if it's somebody big like Terry Brooks, but eventually, Terry will also respond to you. The access that people have to authors is just amazing. So
yeah, now Terry is almost an unfair comparison because Terry and Judine are so sweet that they set the bar awfully high.
Well, Sean Speakman actually does a lot of his PR stuff. I was on a panel. I was on a panel with Terry last year, and he was a trip. He was. The con kind of screwed up and just put too many of us on the panel. Put like 6 people. And I'm like, all you really need is Terry. But and so and everybody, and he was one of the last. Me and him were one of the last two people to get to the stage, and this is a small con, but we get up on the stage and there's no room at the table, and except for a chair, the last chair, and the chair off away from the table. And I'm like, Terry, you got to sit at the table. I'm half ready to take the person who's in the center and say, get up. Terry Brooks needs to sit here. But Terry sits away from the table, sits back very comfortably with that Terry Brooks smile that he always and is just the most the most humble, sweet. He was not bothered at all by any of it. And I mean, one of the most approachable people. And I saw the same thing with Mercedes. There was this woman who was in tears at the Indiana Comic Con because she didn't have, she had spent what little money she had, and she had forgotten to bring her books with her for Mercedes to sign. And she was just in literal tears. And she wasn't trying to make a spectacle of herself. I saw her kind of standing off crying. I said, ma'am, are you okay? And I finally got her to tell me what was wrong. I said, no, come here. And I introduced her to Misty, and Misty goes, oh, hey. And she goes, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. Misty brought out a bunch of these postcards with our artwork on it, personalized and signed, and just gave them to her, made her day. And you'd be surprised how many authors are like that, because, man, I love anybody who reads for their entertainment.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna end with a story that is, to my mind, the ultimate example of that ever happened in my presence. So Dave Gemmell was at a San Diego Comic-Con for Del Rey, and he was there with his wife and kids. And there were three people in the world who had been major influences to Dave. And two of them were Louis L'Amour for action and Tolkien for fantasy. And L'Amour had died years before. Tolkien had written back to Dave, and Dave apparently carried that letter around until it just disintegrated. Well, there was a third person, and we're standing there talking. And this guy was a guy that Dave loved for the way he blended the hero and the villain. And so while we're standing there, a friend of mine comes over and says, oh, I saw this guy going down that aisle over there. And so I went over and got him and brought him back. Now, you've got to understand, Dave was a tall, ruddy, deep-voiced Brit. So he was an imposing figure. This guy and his wife walk up, and I said to Dave, I'd like you to meet Stan Lee. Stan, I'd like you to meet Dave Gemmell. Dave is immediately like frozen, like a deer in the headlights. He's like saying to his kids, kids, this is Stan Lee. Stan sees this, picks up a copy of Legend, drops it on the table, and says, so where's my autograph? And immediately everything is fabulous. Dave ends up talking a lot with Joni because she's British, and they have a wonderful time. But I have never forgotten how wonderful Stan was in that moment, just breaking through it and making Dave feel like king of the world.
Yeah. I've heard that about him. And I've also got to like hang out with Peter David. I'm thrilled that I got to know him a little bit. And some of these old legends that the Stan Lee era people, they're going away quick.
Well, I used to hang out a bunch with the guy who hired Stan for his first job in comics. So
no shit. Wow. Yeah. I tell you, and you end on that story. I'm going to end on this one. You know who Tony Isabella is?
Of course.
All right. For those of you who don't know Tony Isabella created Black Lightning and I think Iron Fist two iconic black comic characters, and we were at a fanboy expo in Orlando together, and it was early in the morning, and we're sitting I'm sitting having breakfast with him, and I said, I gotta ask, because if you ever see Tony, you ever see the picture of Tony on the websites, he looks like this big imposing man. Tony's a hobbit. I mean,
Yeah.
Tony's this itty bitty guy. I mean, he's rotund, but he's a very small guy.
He's also a delightful fellow.
Oh yeah, he's super duper nice. But we're sitting there, we're having breakfast, we're talking. I said, dude, I gotta ask, how the hell does an Italian white guy end up writing some of the most iconic black characters ever? And the story he said was, well, because I don't really tell this story much. I said, what? Come on, guy, you got to tell me. He goes, all right, well, he grew up in a town that was very segregated, literally split down the middle by train tracks, and where there was a black side and a white side of town. And of course, on their side of town was the library, and where all the comic kids who were into comic books from both sides of town would meet once a week and talk comics and swap comics and do their comic book stuff. And he got to be very good friends. It was one of the few times they got to interact, because really in those days you didn't really cross the tracks. It was what it was. But whenever everybody was friends when they were in that part in the library during that time. And he was an aspiring comic artist, and he says that he promised his friends that if I make it, I will create some characters just for you guys. And that's exactly what he did. And I'm like, he goes, yeah, I never tell that story. I said, dude, I would never not tell that story.
Well, Tony is just, he's a delight. And happily, I think he's starting to do a few more shows again.
Oh, good. Yeah, I like I said, I did a couple shows with him. Like I said, I did a show with Peter David, and I think Peter passed away recently, right?
No.
Is he still?
Peter's been facing some health problems, but he's still with us.
Oh, he's still with us? I know he was in pretty bad shape. The Cove was going to invite him out to a show, but we were just too scared to, because I don't want to be the guy that killed Peter David.
No, as a matter of fact, I think we got some pretty good news on how he's feeling in the last couple of days.
Oh, that's wonderful. I tell you, he's a no-nonsense guy on a panel. He's a cantankerous old bastard. If you say something stupid, he will call you on it. I saw him get on stage and just, I forget, somebody in the audience said something, asked a ridiculous question, and basically he said, that was a stupid question.
Okay,
well,
thank you so much for your generous time and for all the stories. I really appreciate it. We'll end the recording here, and we'll let you go, Steve.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching, liking, and subscribing. I hope you enjoyed the series. It was an absolute honor to host these guys and hear their stories. My gratitude goes out to Steve Saffel and to Brian D. Anderson, without whom this wouldn't have happened. And finally, please do check out Brian's Conan the Child, releasing December 26th from Titan Books. And until next time, take it easy, you Stitch and Dog.